Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending where you're tuning in from. Carrie Davis here from AAPA. Thank you very much for taking some time out of your day to learn with us on a super important topic in maritime and transportation generally. We have security policy experts here, transport policy experts here, and we're going to get a few different perspectives on the scourge of human trafficking and how we, as the maritime industry, can combat it, and what our government partners and government officials are doing about it as well. As I mentioned, I'm Carrie Davis, AAPA General Counsel and Director of Government Relations. I'm proud to introduce our awesome presenters, and then I want to get out of the way and let them go. First presenting, we have each of them will give a little more in depth about their backgrounds and expertise. So I'm going to give it very high level. First, we have presenting Mar Bretman, CEO of BEST. Then we have Stephanie Jones-Stebbins, Managing Director of Maritime for the Port of Seattle, a wonderful member of AAPA, and one of our longest and most involved leaders in this policy space among the ports. We then have Paul Anderson, CEO, Port of Tampa. Tampa has been really ratcheting up their efforts on this policy front, and Paul was a member of a blue ribbon panel that in the last couple of years did a report on human trafficking, which is a great segue to our last presenter, Julie Abraham. We're honored that you'd come visit with us from the federal government today. Julie is the Executive Director of the Office of International Transport and Trade at the United States Department of Transportation, and they played a major role in that report that I just mentioned. With that, thank you again. Thank you to all AAPA staff and the staffs of all the organizations that are part of this today, and I'm excited to hear from our presenters. With that, I'm turning off my camera, and Mar.
Thank you so much, Carrie, and we are so grateful to the AAPA's incredible leadership in bringing this issue to your members. It's been such a privilege for our organization to work with AAPA and many of the members who are on this call today to come together and make a powerful difference in the lives of really vulnerable people. So thank you. My organization, BEST, or Businesses Ending Slavery and Trafficking, is a nonprofit organization that assists employers to prevent human trafficking. We do this work through awareness raising, like we're doing here today. We also consult with organizations. We provide training, both online and in person, and we run a program called Safe Jobs that helps connect survivors of human trafficking with fantastic jobs and employers. So let's get into the content for today. So the first question is, what is human trafficking? What are we talking about today? The word human trafficking is very confusing. So here is a simple definition. And if you remember anything from today, please try to remember this definition. Human trafficking is using force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into work or prostitution, or any time a minor is involved in a commercial sex act. That's also considered human trafficking under federal law. And in the US, there are two basic types of human trafficking that are occurring. One is labor trafficking, which is the involvement of forced or coerced labor in any kind of industry. And then there's sex trafficking, which takes place specifically when somebody is working in the sex trade. So if an adult is compelled into the sex trade using force, fraud, and coercion, that is human trafficking. If a child is involved in exchanging sex for anything of value, whether it be housing or food or money, that's also considered sex trafficking under federal law. And there's something that is important that most people don't realize about sex trafficking in particular, and that is that if a buyer solicits or patronizes sex from a sex trafficking victim, like a child, that is considered human trafficking as well. Okay, so how many of you have noticed that this definition is probably really different than what people think about when they think about human trafficking in the maritime industry? When you talk about human trafficking, you probably hear something like this. You mean when people are brought over in shipping containers? Well, that could be human trafficking, but it's actually more likely to be human smuggling. So let's look at the difference between the two. Human trafficking is that use of force, fraud, or coercion, or involving a child in a commercial sex act, whereas human smuggling is when a person brings another person across a border without legal documentation. In human trafficking, one party is forced or tricked or coerced, and then in human smuggling, both parties agree to cross that border. Human trafficking, a victim may never even cross a border. I know victims who were trafficked in their own hometowns. With human smuggling, the people always cross a border. With human trafficking, a person is not free to leave a work situation or a commercial sex situation. With human smuggling, a person is free to leave. So that is really a fundamental difference. If a person is brought in a shipping container and once they arrive in the US, they're free to leave and go do what they want and work wherever they want, that is human smuggling. But if they arrive here and then they're forced to work in a situation that they can't leave, then it becomes a human trafficking situation. So I wanted to give a little bit of information about the scope of the problem. It is a huge problem. There are 40 million people who were victims of human trafficking in 2016, according to the International Labor Organization. So it is happening across the world. And where specifically does it happen? Everywhere. It's hidden in plain sight. Here's a study in San Diego County that found that about a third of undocumented migrant workers had experienced some form of force, coercion, or fraud while working in the United States. They experienced these in construction, cleaning, food processing, manufacturing, and others. So it really does happen everywhere and across all industries. And you may be thinking right now, yeah, our industry isn't listed here, so maybe it doesn't happen here in the maritime industry. And many people in the maritime industry are unionized, right? They know their rights, they're paid well, and they are protected from a situation of human trafficking. At the same time, you also likely encounter a lot of people in the maritime industry that are not afforded these same protections. So now that we've talked about what human trafficking is and where it happens, I wanted to look at the intersections with the maritime industry, including cargo, fishing, and cruise. And I thought I would just give you some stories today so you can start to understand what it looks like and how it happens. So let's start with fishing. You probably know, or you may know, that labor trafficking has been really well documented internationally as happening in the fishing industry. But a lot of people don't realize that it also can happen here in North America. A few years ago, 2 fishermen were recruited from Indonesia to work on an American flagged vessel. One was a seasoned fisherman, one was new to fishing. They were both offered a lucrative contract to work on this American flagged vessel, and they each made a tremendous sacrifice to be separated from their kids in Indonesia and their families so that they could make money for, doing fishing and give their kids a better life. But when they started working, they experienced extreme hardship. So the captain and his nephews hit and kicked them. They were never allowed to leave the ship. They were never paid the amount that they had been offered in the contract. They were given inadequate protective equipment so that they frequently were injured or had illnesses. And the captain would refuse medical treatment. These 2 men worked up to 20 hours a day with 4 hours of sleep for months on end. The working conditions were so bad that they believed that they would die on board the ship unless they were able to escape. But they were afraid to leave because the captain said that they had debt bondage. They had to pay $6,000 to buy their freedom, and they knew they didn't have the money to pay. In addition, the captain held their travel documents, so they couldn't leave. They couldn't prove who they were if they were to leave. So when the boat was docked in San Francisco, the person guarding them got terribly drunk one night and fell asleep. And these two men, while he was sleeping, they found their passports and they escaped off the ship. Our federal government investigated and determined that these two men were indeed victims of human trafficking, victims of modern-day slavery. So this is what modern slavery looks like in the US today. Labor and sex trafficking can also happen in the cruise industry. So two people were recruited to work on a cruise ship. They were given a contract for 3 months. 6 months into the contract, they still were being paid far below the wage they agreed to, or not paid at all. They were, in order to make, just meet their basic needs, they had to engage in survival sex on the ship. They were unable to exit the ships in the locations where it docked. One day they became so desperate that they jumped overboard. One of them was seriously injured, and when the police recovered them and interviewed them, the police learned that these two were victims of human trafficking. And they were able to get connected with local human services and local legal services. And as you can imagine, these two people were traumatized by their experience on the cruise ship. One other thing about human trafficking that I've mentioned is that it can happen to our own kids and in our own communities. So this is Noelle. Noelle was raised in an abusive family. At age 15, Noelle's parents kicked her out of their home. And so after she became homeless, she met a guy who offered her everything that she needed: a place to stay, food, companionship, and even love. She was so vulnerable as a kid that she gratefully accepted. And she fell in love with this guy. And that guy began pimping her out, making money off of her and keeping it for himself. This happens over and over and over again to girls and boys across the US. A vulnerable person gets trapped in prostitution, and that's trafficking. The sex buyer, the person who bought Noelle, who buys a minor, that's sex trafficking as well. Unfortunately, Noelle was subjected to tremendous physical, psychological abuse and coercion by her controller and by the men who purchased her. After years in prostitution, she managed to get out through just sheer resilience and tenacity. Noelle is a survivor, and today she leads the organization for prostitution survivors. She does tremendous work assisting people and adults to exit, because she didn't have services when she wanted to exit. So she created them for other people to be able to help them to exit. And she served kids as young as 11, 12, and 13 years old. And Noelle remembers when the ships would come into Seattle. She remembers seafarers coming to exploit girls like her. I've talked with security managers of ports whose staff have seen these kids, seen women on their properties as well. So I know these stories are really hard to hear, and I'm really grateful that you're listening to them, because you are in a position to change the stories of these individuals and individuals like them. We as a country are founded on freedom, and your ports and your companies can be a beacon of hope and freedom for people who want to escape exploitation and modern-day slavery. So today we've talked about what trafficking is, how prevalent it is, that it's the fastest growing criminal activity in the world, according to the Department of Defense. And now I've shared some stories about how it impacts ports and maritime. So you're probably wondering, this is horrific. What can we do about this? And that is what the rest of the webinar is going to be about today. We've got some outstanding speakers who are going to be addressing that in more detail. And I'll just give you two quick things that ports and folks in maritime can easily do. One is that thanks to the Port of Seattle and a very generous donor, we developed training, and then specifically for the maritime industry, and we're able to offer that training free through the months of July and August. So that training will help you and your staff detect and deter human trafficking, and you'd earn a certificate of completion. And I will also put this in any discussions we have, but here is a link if you want to register, and as well as an enrollment code if you want to take the training for free. So first, training, and then second, awareness resources. So if you have anybody on one of your properties who needs help, These are examples of awareness resources that we developed with the Port of Seattle. We'd be happy to work with you, share these resources. The Port has been incredibly generous in wanting to make these resources available to ports across the US. So, and you'll see there's a multilingual poster there so that if people can't speak English, they can still know how to access a human trafficking hotline here in the US. Okay, and then here's my contact information if we can assist you in any way. So BEST, as I said, is a nonprofit. We just want to see victims get the help that they need, and we want ports to become hubs of freedom for people to be able to get that help. So we really need your partnership and your leadership in order to create these hubs of freedom and safety for ports and organizations across the US. You are welcome to reach out and contact me, and we're happy to do anything we can to get you started. We're happy to provide some free consultation if you need it. We're happy to provide you with training. You can use our posters, and I would love to just get to know you and see if there are other ways we can partner. So please feel free to reach out. So thank you so much.
Mar, thank you very much for that. It's difficult for me or anyone to follow. Stephanie Jones-Stebbins, Managing Director of Maritime at the Port of Seattle. Stephanie, take it away. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's see, could you see, show my screen? So
we see your screen, Stephanie. Thank you.
Great. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Carrie. Thank you as well to Mar. I cannot say enough great things about BEST and the support that they've given the Port of Seattle on this journey. So let me just start by saying a little about myself. I'm the Managing Director of the Maritime Division at the Port of Seattle, and I've been in that job about two and a half years, but I've been in the port industry for quite a long time. Prior to that, early in my career, I actually worked in Southeast Asia for a couple years, which was my first exposure to the issue of human trafficking. It really left a deep impact on me about really some of the heartbreaking stories we heard before from Mar, but being exposed to those early on, impacted me deeply, but I did not know that it was happening here in our country, and to learn that it was happening in the United States and really happening in our community. I live in Seattle. Just a terrible thing to know, and wanted to take action. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Port of Seattle has done. The port has been a leader thanks to some early leaders a number of years ago at the Port of Seattle, understanding that this is an issue that the port should take on. At least in part, our entree to this was because of the airport, but the Port of Seattle runs the SeaTac International Airport as well as the Port of Seattle. But as we delve deeper in it, as Mar shared the stories with us, we see there really is a maritime connection as well. So I'm going to share a little bit about what the Port of Seattle has done. And let's see, my slides are not progressing. Let me try this. There we go. So a little bit about what the Port of Seattle has done. So the port adopted a policy a little over 2 years ago, and that policy included really 4 different tranches, looking at policies and procedures, public awareness and education, like some of the signs that you saw from Mar's presentation, as well as employee awareness and training. And then finally, community partnerships. So partnering, of course, with BEST, but also with other local governments that could really help amplify the message. Okay, so first, why a port anti-human trafficking effort? This is just maybe another story to share, but about 3 years ago, there was a big story in Seattle where there was a large human trafficking ring, a sex trafficking ring, that was busted in a very affluent community suburb of Seattle. And it was really shocking because it was right here in really one of the most prosperous neighborhoods in our community, where especially the high-tech folks had been engaged. And what we saw was that most of the victims had come through Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, which the Port of Seattle runs. So we saw that not only this happening here in our community, but the connection to our very own organization. So as we've already heard, this is a global industry and actually impacting Washington State. We had the 8th highest call volume in National Human Trafficking Hotline in 2019. So both as the owner and operator of the airport and a wide variety of maritime facilities, we have cargo, we have cruise, we have fishing, all of the things we've heard about, as well as a major employer and a public sector leader. It really, we felt it was our responsibility to act. So a little bit of what we've done thus far. So as you saw, we had the commission, our elected commission, passed a motion in 2018. So we have implemented a policy and engaged with BEST in a national working group to really look across at appropriate policies. In terms of public awareness, we have launched a regional human trafficking campaign with our local governments, the city and the county, and especially important is a public transportation organizations where we live, which really helps amplify the message. Also have developed trainings that we heard referred to before. There's airport focused trainings and there's maritime focused trainings that our own employees have put together, and all of us on the maritime in the maritime business have taken those trainings, and they are very informative about what to look for and what we can all do as being involved in the maritime industry, what to look for and how we can make sure that we are making our environment not conducive to human trafficking. And finally, of course, the partnerships that we continue. This is just an example of some of the signage that has been up around the Port of Seattle. So you see both airport signage is what you see on the top, but on the bottom here, he lied to me about my job, now he won't let me leave. This is actually signs that we have around the maritime part of the port in multiple languages. And I will tell you, we know they're working because we see them being torn down and we have to put them back up again. So there's someone out there who doesn't want these signs to be visible to folks. So we have these up throughout our maritime facilities. A little bit about training. So we have part of our required curriculum for all port employees is to take these trainings. These are trainings that can be done, it's an e-learning, so they can be done through your computer, which is especially convenient right now since we're all virtual all the time. We do have in-person trainings and train the trainer trainings. There are, I should also mention, for our police department, specific trainings as well. We know that what folks have seen as they, for instance, pass through our airport, other people at other airports have taken note of the signs, which are located throughout the airport, but especially in our restrooms. So other ports have contacted us and began to implement programs at their airports as well. This is a picture of Russ Reed, who is our Maritime Security Manager, and he talks about, he actually is featured in our training video and really illustrates what he has seen, similar to some of the stories that Mar mentioned about cargo facilities, like what the observations and really what, as maritime employees, again, we should be looking for and what we can do. And again, we also have a module for folks working at our airport, slightly different issues and things to look for. With that, I'm going to wrap up and turn it on to our next speaker, but happy to answer any questions. And these are just a few of the things that we have done at the Port of Seattle, and happy to share more. Thank you.
Great, and next up we have Mr. Paul Anderson coming to us from the Port of Tampa. Mr. Anderson, please have at it.
Yeah, hi. It's a real pleasure to be here today as it is a United Nations Human Trafficking Awareness Day, and to represent port leaders from around the country. And I really thought it would be helpful, even though we're not going to have my presentation. I think we had a little technical difficulty. I want to thank the previous speakers, the organizations, Bess, Mar, and what you're doing. We have worked very closely as well with the Port of Seattle, and we modeled a lot of what we did at Port Tampa Bay to be able to implement a program here at Port Tampa Bay. And when I was originally appointed by Secretary Lynn to her Committee on Human Trafficking, I was very new to this issue. And as a port CEO, I felt a real responsibility to get educated on this issue if I was going to be representing America's ports. And in that regard, I immediately contacted a good friend who was serving as Florida's Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who had done quite a bit to be able to promote this here in the state of Florida and nationally. As I got up to speed, I started looking around the country and doing some due diligence, and saw that Port of Seattle was a real important, and now my screen is being, give me just a minute, please. So, as we began our journey at Port Tampa Bay, we wanted to find a way that we could create awareness of this issue. And as we did that, we not only found that Port of Seattle had done a number of things working with Best, we found some of my colleagues on the Committee of Human Trafficking at the Department of Transportation, and that was Truckers Against Trafficking. When we looked at our port complex and the challenges that we faced as how to promote this to key stakeholders. One of the biggest stakeholders that we have here at our port or any port is truck drivers. And that was an area that we quickly realized we could make a difference in awareness and promoting this issue, education, as we have approximately 10,000 truck drivers per day here coming through the port. So we worked with Truckers Against Trafficking. We implemented signage throughout the port complex, as well as where our truckers came in to get their port identification cards and had to check in at the port. We also used our signage to in our boardroom. The other thing that we did was we decided to incorporate the issue of human trafficking into our annual safety conference. We have been doing a safety conference now for 8 years. It has grown into one of the top safety summits, and certainly in the port industry, but around the country. And we have now have that as one of our breakout sessions in our safety summit. The current Attorney General of Florida is Ashley Moody. We have also continued to work with our state's Attorney General in promoting awareness, as well as there is the Florida Human Trafficking Commission in the state, which she chairs, and we participate as well with our local Human Trafficking Commission. Is in that regard, the Greater Tampa Bay area has been awarded this next year's Super Bowl. That has also become a major focus of Super Bowls as they've experienced human trafficking issues at each Super Bowl. And I appointed one of my senior executives to represent us on that task force. It includes a multi-level task force, law enforcement, NGOs, and others to fight human trafficking in the Super Bowl. So what I want to do is be able to urge my colleagues around the country as port CEOs, as port leaders, that it really takes you to implement some of these things that you can do in the toolbox to create awareness. And I would also want to focus a little bit on, just because you may not know or be aware of that issue in your port or in the surrounding region that you're in, you can still make a difference in fighting this very tragic issue. And I would suggest that there are a number of very simple things that you can do. I've shared a few. One of the others is having your board adopt a resolution. We adopted a resolution at our board in a proclamation recognizing Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And then each year now we're incorporating that into our social media, as we did earlier today and earlier this week. But I also want to encourage, if you have the opportunity, to either yourself or appoint somebody in your organization, as Seattle has done, to take a leadership role working with an NGO. Seattle used BEST, and we're very helpful in developing a structured program and a formal program. We emulated that in a lot of ways, and we thought that Truckers Against Trafficking was a good NGO for us to be able to participate in this issue. The other important thing is it's like when our safety summit, we also talk about many other issues. One of those is cybersecurity and cyber resiliency, which all ports, American ports, are experiencing every single day. You have to take some personal leadership and ownership of this issue. And if you don't, it will come and find you, and you will be working from behind. It's much more difficult. So getting proactive on this is, I think, a really responsible thing to do, particularly among my colleagues around the country. My personal involvement, including, as I mentioned earlier, being appointed by Secretary Elaine Chao, Advisory Committee on Human Trafficking. We've participated with a broad range of transportation associations in that role. It was representing all modes of transportation. And that work culminated in a congressionally mandated report in the current status of human trafficking, ways to stem the tide and help victims. The Department of Transportation established an award program along with that committee's work, in addition to other DOT initiatives. I'm sure we're going to hear about that from our DOT speaker today. Again, I want to encourage leaders to buy into this program. Take responsibility, set an example, personally get involved, create awareness. Even if you, I remember very clearly when I first spoke with our then Attorney General, Pam Bondi, she, with great emotion, thanked me for willing to serve in this capacity on the committee. But she said, if you can just make a difference in one person's life in the world, you will have made a big difference. And in that regard, I would say, just knowing that you might possibly take somebody out of servitude, bondage, and being abused, whatever the situation may be, is for me a reason to be involved in this issue. We also continue to work with our local sheriff's office. Our sheriff has been very involved in this issue, as well as several of the sheriffs in our surrounding counties. They have made some significant law enforcement actions, and very recently breaking up rings here in the Tampa Bay area. And as I think most people know, actor Liam Neeson did a live event sponsored by It's a Penalty. So there's plenty of opportunities for you as leaders. For those of you that are working at port authorities, I would also urge you to get the leadership in your organization, bring this to their attention, and take action, positive action, because for me it is incumbent upon ports in the United States to work together, work with our NGOs to fight this very pervasive issue. And I'm proud to be able to represent American Association of Port Authorities from a port CEO standpoint, and work with all of you. And if I can ever be of assistance to you or your CEO, I'm always available to have a discussion on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was fantastic, and I just love, I can hear the passion and the meaning behind the words that you're saying, and so thank you for caring so much about this issue. I really appreciate it. I'm just stepping in for Kerry because he's having some technical difficulties. I want to introduce Julie Abraham, who's the Director of the Office of Transport and Trade for the Office of the Secretary for the U.S. Department of Transportation. So Julie, I will hand it over to you for your introduction and presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, and everyone on the call who's joining us today. And thank you to the AAPA and BAS for spotlighting the role that the port and maritime sectors can play in combating human trafficking. I just want to make sure that I have shared my presentation here. Does everyone see it?
We can see it, Julie. Thank you.
Okay, great. So let's see, is it an appropriate, I know I have to do something to make it a slide.
Yeah, just click from the beginning.
Okay, perfect. So I hope everyone can see it, but let me just start a little bit by talking about the background, my background here at the department, because it's so vital. I spent so many years working on safety and fuel economy and so many important programs for the department. But it was only in 2012 when the Secretary of Transportation turned to my office here and asked us to look into what the department can do on human trafficking. We thought that, well, since we're not a law enforcement type of government organization, what is it that we can do? And it was then that we brought people together and started thinking about our role in this. This program is really dear to my heart because I feel that we've been able to, working with others here within the department, with other agencies, and with the public and other stakeholders, to really make a difference over the last so many years. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Department of Transportation has done, particularly with respect to partnerships. And I know some of you have heard a little bit of that already. And let me start by just taking it a little bit on the key available data that serves as backdrop to global trafficking problem. I know Mar mentioned as many as 24.9 million men, women, and children across the globe are held against their will and trafficked into forced labor and prostitution. So the president and the executive branch have made human trafficking a top priority. And here at the department, the transportation secretary, Secretary Elaine Chao, who's a member of the president's task force on human trafficking, is also fully committed to working with all transportation stakeholders on this important issue, both domestically and internationally. And as Polaris study of 104 survivors found, victims were trafficked on nearly every form of transportation, including 3% on cruise ships. So combating human trafficking in the transportation industry for us is a multimodal effort, as any occurrence of human trafficking, whether it's on a ship, flight, bus, or train, diminishes our sector as a whole. And that's why the Secretary appointed 15 members to the Department of Transportation Advisory Committee on Human Trafficking. They were selected to represent a cross-section of stakeholders from both industry and labor, including representatives from the maritime, ports, aviation, bus, law enforcement, rail, and trucking sectors, as well as non-governmental organizations and associations. And we thank both Paul and Stephanie for taking a part of that committee. The advisory committee submitted its final report entitled Combating Human Trafficking in the Transportation Sector to the department in July of 2019. And it included recommendations for not only the department, but also Congress, states, and local and industry stakeholders. And these recommendations were provided to Congress, all 50 governors and state DOT heads, and we continue to use fora like this forum to share the report with stakeholders. So when the committee was doing its work, it wanted to ensure the report was useful to stakeholders such as yourselves as you develop your own initiatives to combat human trafficking. Whether you are just taking on the issue or haven't been champions in the fight to end the trafficking, you'll find this report very, very helpful. There are some key elements that the advisory committee points to as examples for all transportation stakeholders, and these include a model strategy with policies and protocols, and a leadership proclamation that can be tailored and implemented as part of a comprehensive counter-trafficking approach. So training and awareness, best practices and examples were also included, and this also included some from BEST, as well as a chart that highlights minimum standards for determining training efficacy. And then also included is a quick implementation guides, which is, for me, it's my favorite. And that's for anyone new to this issue to hit the ground running. So for ports, you can see this information on page 7-28, and it includes examples of indicators. It also includes components of a comprehensive strategy, such as the importance of leadership buy-in, adopting a counter-human trafficking policy, establishing partnerships, determining training rollout, participating in public and targeted awareness campaigns, instituting victim assistance crisis response procedures, and creating second chance employment program. The report also includes sample materials for each of these components that I just highlighted. So I encourage you to take a look at that. The cross-cutting theme tying all of these components together is partnership. It is one of the main focuses of the department's work on the issue of combating human trafficking. Several years ago, as I mentioned, when we launched the program, we did form a partnership called Transportation Leaders Against Human Trafficking. And in that partnership, we included stakeholders representing all modes of transportation and the travel industry who are working jointly to maximize the collective impact in combating trafficking. The 5 focus areas included leadership engagement, industry education and sharing, policy development, public awareness and outreach, and information sharing and analysis. These focus areas are certainly echoed by the advisory committee report and recommendations. So when I last spoke to an AAPA group about a year and a half ago, the TLAT, as we call it, consisted of around 70 or so entities. And one of the key recommendations of the advisory committee was for the department to grow that partnership. And it has grown significantly this year. So on January 28th, the secretary launched the 100 Pledges in 100 Days call to action. And we now have over 500 TLAT pledges signed by every mode of transportation, labor, and non-governmental organizations from every state across the countries. And certainly signatories include 7 ports, 184 airports and airlines, 134 urban and rural transit agencies, 35 trucking and bus companies, 9 railways, 49 state departments of transportations, 8 states, and 11 cities. So we wanted 100 and we got 400 additional ones, making it all 100. And they've all committed to training over 1.3 million employees and raise public awareness among the traveling public to help fight human trafficking. So through TLAT, we also offer a variety of resources that complement the work of the advisory committee. And so in the pledge, we ask leaders to issue a leadership statement, train their employees, and raise public awareness. And so today, I want to take this opportunity to invite each of you organizations, if you haven't done so, to join our effort by signing the Transportation Leaders Against Human Trafficking Pledge, which is available on our website, transportation.gov/stophumantrafficking. And our employee training, just want to touch a little bit on that. We, in the department, we have a requirement that we train all 54,000 DOT employees every 3 years, including special training for our bus and truck inspectors. So in coordination with our partners, we've also developed a suite of training materials for the aviation, transit, rail, and motor coach industry. It's great to see the work that BEST and others are doing in the ports and maritime space. And I would encourage you to also connect with the Port of Tampa and the Port of Seattle as you each develop your own strategy to combat human trafficking. We understand the value of your employees' time and that the transportation workforce has many other requirements for training, but nonetheless, we can tell you that when employees are trained to recognize and respond to human trafficking, actionable tips are reported. So in the aviation sector, when Congress decided to make training mandatory for flight attendants, we are hearing from our law enforcement colleagues that the actionable tips continue to grow. Likewise, Truckers Against Trafficking, through their partnership with the National Human Trafficking Hotline, has also shown the differences these partnerships can make. And just you have in front of you this these posters that you can find on our website. These were developed by TLAT partners, and what we wanted is print-ready multimodal posters and logos that are tailored for the transportation sector that can be used by our stakeholders. In fact, there is a maritime-specific graphic you may find useful that includes "Put the Brakes on Human Trafficking" tagline that was displayed on the previous slide. But hopefully we can work on additional posters as well. And let me turn a little bit to grants and awards. We here at the department are also grateful to also provide funding opportunities for stakeholders working on this issue. So our Federal Transit Administration, as well as our Motor Carrier Safety Administration, both provide grants. The information on that can be found on our website. But following one of the recommendations of the advisory committee this year, the secretary established a new annual $50,000 Combating Human Trafficking in Transportation Impact Award. And the award aims to incentivize individuals and entities to think creatively in developing innovative solutions to combat human trafficking in the transportation sector. So the first award went to United Against Slavery for their National Transportation Outreach Survey, and it was announced on May 7th. It will help bridge the gap, the data gap on the intersection of human trafficking and transportation. And they will survey about 15,000 respondents and will make the results available to the public. And again, I would just like to take the opportunity to invite each of your organizations to join our efforts by signing our Transportation Leaders Against Human Trafficking Pledge. The pledge and other resources can be found on our website at transportation.gov/stophumantrafficking, or you can email us at trafficking@dot.gov. You can also sign up for our listserv to be updated generally quarterly. So we look forward to continuing this conversation and to continuing to collaborate with the ports and maritime sectors as we collectively work to combat human trafficking. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. So we have a few more minutes left and want to welcome anyone who has any questions. You can either ask them here, or you're welcome to put them into the chat function. It might be easiest to put them into the chat function, but we would love to see any questions that you might have.
Mark, Carrie Davis here from AAPA. Is my audio okay?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks for taking the driver's seat. I've taken a step back because of my internet issues, and I apologize for that. I do have a question, probably most appropriate for you and Julie, but Paul and Stephanie, I'd love to hear from too if they have thoughts. Those posters at the end are really stark. They're stark images, and it's a little uncomfortable for me to ask this, but on the ground, on the day-to-day, what are some of those telltale signs, if any, that maybe someone is being trafficked or victim? I mean, is it looking for young women and men that look underage who are being, forcibly escorted by someone? Is it bruises? I know one of the women in the poster had bruises. Is it someone whose documents don't seem to be in order? I mean, what are these other types of signs that port personnel can be looking for?
I'll jump in, Julie, and feel free to respond as well. So we have put the indicators of trafficking for ports in 4 buckets. So one is control. So anytime, as you were saying, Carrie, that you see a high level of control of one party over another or over a group of people, and that can look a variety of ways, but it's just this unusual level of control, surveillance of another person. Next one is abuse or injury. So anytime you see someone who has experienced some injury, or there's some abuse that's apparent, or you hear abuse taking place, that can be a number of different things. So it's worth looking into that to make sure that if it is human trafficking, then you can know how to report it. But often in the attempt to control, a trafficker will abuse or allow another person to experience harm. The third bucket is confusion. So a person doesn't know where they are. They don't know, they've been deceived about their contract. They just are unusually confused about their whereabouts or who they're with. They don't even know who their travel companions are. That is another sign. And then the fourth bucket we put it in is sex buying. So anytime a person is trying to engage in the sex trade, it's impossible or almost impossible for a buyer to know whether the person they're buying is trafficked or not. And so it's very difficult for police and service providers to figure that out, even after interviewing people for hours. And so anytime there's sex buying, that could be an indicator that human trafficking may be taking place.
And I would speak to not so much the signs. I'll leave that to our experts. But I would say this, the posters themselves and how to deploy those so that you can get the most effect. Julie, good to see you. We spoke at this during our committee meetings in Washington, they're designed to grab your attention. They're designed if you are going through the metro in Washington, D.C. or wherever it may be, an airport, as you're walking, it's designed to catch your attention. We did not use those posters, but I would say this, they're all available. We downloaded, we again use Truckers Against Trafficking because it fit more the target demographic. We were working to create awareness of in the trucking community. They have some excellent, there is a number of other organizations that have their, the content's free, download, and I believe we produce these in-house using, you know, the digital media that we were able to get. And it's one of the easiest things you can do is to put those up in the entrance to the port, in one of your, if you have if you issue IDs where their cameras are taken, just to create awareness. If you do nothing else, that's a big step in creating awareness.
And I'll just add here, as I was listening to the presentation, I was wondering how folks are feeling, and if you're sort of overwhelmed by all the amazing things that the Department of Transportation has done and that Port of Seattle and Port of Tampa have done. And so, if you need any assistance sort of sorting out what you want your strategy to be, I just wanted to say again, feel free to call me. We're happy to talk with you for a couple hours to help you strategize where you want to make your impact as a port.
I just want to add, you know, the question about indicators is so important, and I think that speaks. I think you covered it very well, Mar. I just think it just speaks to the importance of training again, over and over again. And a public awareness material is important. And you know, when we did ours, we used we hired a contractor to look at focus, you know, to get some focus groups to see how they, you know, perceive and how they see this. So, you know, if there's partnerships that can be formed to create these public awareness materials, that would be great too. But there's plenty out there, and as Mar said, feel free to reach out to us. We have an email ready to respond, and if we can't provide it, we can hook you with someone who we know is doing an amazing job in the area.
The other, if I could, there's also great wallet size that you can have with the national that we handed out. We made them available to all of our employees. They're available to all the people that come through our security operations center and where they get the IDs. So that was another good thing that we received from DOT.
And I would highly recommend taking advantage of the free training that is available now to really go more into that question, Carrie, because that's a great question.
Well, folks, Carrie Davis here again by phone, and we're right up against the hour. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. We appreciate your taking your time here today, but we also very much appreciate our presenters, and a huge shout out to all the staffers who really make this thing run: Sierra Purden, Andrew Cameron, Kevin Connolly, as well as our presenters. Great plug at the end there, Stephanie, of Best free training through September, I believe. I'm not sure if that's exactly right, but for the next few months, it's free. And we will, of course, follow up with all the awesome resources that our presenters mentioned here today. With that, thank you very much. Stay healthy, stay safe, and all the best to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.